Set two. When I first came to Bolton, I wasn't sure that I wanted to be there, no matter how nice Emma and Fred turned out to be. It was a small town. I found out later it had just 2,000 people, and it seemed to be there just because it was too far from the last town to the next town. There wasn't a reason to put a town where Bolton was. Not one. The country around Bolton is totally flat, flatter than even the rest of Kansas. And Mick says Kansas is the flattest place on earth. So they put this little town here, and there are farms all around it. And when we drove toward it in the car, Fred leaning back in the seat and telling me how much fun it would be, I almost asked them to go back. I'd seen mountains on television and hills on television and saw some hills in Kansas City, and this wasn't right. There was nothing to stop your seeing. You just saw out and out until you couldn't see any farther. But I remember the last thing Sister Jean Autry said to me, "Keep your mouth shut." And so I did that, and so I moved to Bolton with Emma and Fred and settled down to family life. Except there wasn't any. Somehow in all the interviews and examinations and tests and talking to state authorities, and the sisters had not learned all the things that there were to know about Emma and Fred. That they drank. Oh, they're nice enough, and they have never done anything bad to me. Not even a loud word. They always let me do what I want, and even when I do something wrong, they aren't bad about it. Fred just looks at me, smiles, and says, "Let's do better next time." And Emma nods and pats me on the hand and says, she will, won't you, Rachel?" But most of the time, all of the time, they drink. Fred owns the local grain elevator where the farmers come to sell their grain, and he keeps a bottle in his office. And Emma sits at home with a big gallon jug of red wine and watches the soaps, and they drink. They don't fight. Fred always goes to work, except on the weekends when he watches sports on television, and Emma always takes care of the house. I think they love me and are very good to me and are completely drunk by 9 o'clock every morning, so that the world is just one long alcohol haze for them, but it isn't so bad. Not as bad as the orphanage. Even with them drinking and Emma and her soaps, it isn't so bad. Inside of a month, I knew I had figured how to work around the drinking and spent most of my time alone, eating meals with them now and then and going on drives, sometimes on Sunday morning before Fred got too drunk to drive. But other than that, I just did things on my own. Oh, there was school. There still is school. But school in Bolton was like school at the orphanage, except that the teachers don't hit you like the sister do. I don't make friends really easy, so at first I just kind of stayed by myself. And then I met Tracy, and she became my best friend until Python. And we did lots of things together, except that Tracy liked to ride her bike, and I couldn't ride a bike very well because my left leg didn't bend. But then Tracy moved. Her father worked with the highway department and got transferred, and she moved. I didn't get a new friend, but it was still all right. I met Python. It was funny how it happened, even though it doesn't really have to do with Mick and the monument. It's part of how I came to live in Bolton the way I did, so it's important. Mick says Bolton is a microcosm of the world, and I looked it up, and it means a smaller version of the rest of the world. And I guess he's right. If you look at the center of Bolton, there is the city park, the Nickerson's grocery store where the sidewalks are cracked and all the ants come out of the cracks, and Hillary's hardware store and the dime store and 2 gas stations and 3 bars and 2 churches, just like a small big city. Bolton is the county seat, and so in the middle of the town there is a large grass area and an old courthouse with a flagpole and big old black cannon out front with a bunch of round balls welded in a pile. I know they're welded because I tried to get one loose and they didn't move. On the flagpole is the United States flag. Just below it, the Kansas flag. And every morning, Sarah Widmark, who is the court clerk, comes down the steps and raises the 2 flags and looks up at them in the morning light and then walks back up the stairs and goes to clerking. Out around the middle part of town, there are the houses where all the town people live. like Emma and Fred and me. And outside that, there is another ring of houses where people who work for the other town people live, like Garrett Emerson, who works for Fred at the elevator and has about 37 kids. Out there in that outer ring, most of the people don't have a lot of money, so they have big gardens. Some of them keep goats and chickens, and that was the problem. Something about animals gets me. I don't know why, but maybe it's that we couldn't play with animals at the orphanage. So when I see an animal, a dog or a cat or a horse or a goat or even a chicken, I want to touch it and play with it. And even now, when I'm 13 going on 50, like Mick told me, I'm the same. I've just got to touch them. But Emma and Fred can't have animals because Emma gets all swollen and bleeds out her nose from the animal's hair. So I would sometimes go out to the outer ring of the houses and pet goats and dogs and chickens. And one day out there, I saw Python. Of course, he didn't have a name then. He was just a big, scruffy dog with his ribs sticking out and curly, tight hair all over his body, and you could tell he was starving. I hadn't seen him around and don't know where he came from. The first time I saw him, I was standing in front of the Severson's yard, and there was a loud noise from their chicken coop in back of the house. When I ran around, Mrs. Severson came out of the back door of the house with a baseball bat at the same time. I saw this big dog come barreling out of the doors of the coop with a chicken in his mouth. He looked at me, then up at Mrs. Severson's with the bat, and he took off. He cleared the fence around the coop like he had wings, and while he was flying, he swallowed the chicken whole. And that was how I came to name him. The year before Emma and Fred had taken me to the county fair, there was a sideshow with some animals in it, and in one glass case they had a big python. 10 feet long, big round as a man's leg and alive. See it on the inside, the man yelled. Fred took me in while Emma tried to throw nickels on some glass plates, although they kept sliding off. And it was all pretty tacky, except the snake was real, and in the case with the snake, they had a chicken. The chicken looked like it had been in there 8 or 9 years. It was half bald and walked around pecking at things, now and then pecking at the snake, which lay back in a corner. I asked a man wearing dirty clothes and picking his nose what the chicken was for. "Snake food," he said. "What did you think?" Well, it didn't look to me like the snake was ever going to move, let alone eat a chicken, and we turned to leave. Just then the snake's head came up, it flicked its tongue twice, and whap! It nailed the chicken. There was some feathers flying around. The chicken kicked once or twice, and then the snake opened its jaws and swallowed the chicken whole. And that's how I named Python, except that I didn't see him again right away. He took the fence and was gone, chicken and all, in maybe 2 seconds. Mrs. Severson swore a little and then went to call the sheriff, and I limped for home, and that was it. Bolton doesn't have a dog catcher. We have the county sheriff, who is named Kelvin, Warren Kelvin, and the next morning when I got up, I knew I was going to Kelvin's place. It was impossible not to go. He had a pen out back, a chain link concrete pen. That's where they kept the stray dogs until either somebody came to pick them up or Kelvin took them out and shot them, which is usually what happened. I had spent the whole night thinking of the dog flying over the fence and how it wouldn't be right for Kelvin to shoot him. I got to the pen just after dawn, and sure enough, there was the dog. He was sitting on the concrete, leaning against the fence. When I squatted next to him, he growled a low sound, but it wasn't mean. I knew it wasn't. And I put my hand through the fence and I petted him and said, "Ho, Python." It really happened that fast. When I knew his name and said it, he looked at me through the fence and stuck his muzzle down, scarred like it was a road map, and licked my fingers where they were on the wire. There wasn't anything I could do except break him out of there. I waited until dark, and I came back and unlatched the gate and let him loose. I thought he would run, but he didn't. He came to me and stood next to me in the darkness and leaned so his shoulder was against my leg, his fur warm and the muscle tighter under the skin. I petted him and thought that he would leave then, but he he still didn't, but stood waiting. When I took a step, he took one. And when I stopped, he stopped. It was like he was bolted to my leg, would only move when I moved. I grabbed the hair on the top of his shoulders, which about came to my waist, and I leaned on him a bit to take the weight off my stiff leg. We started away from the pen and headed home, and never once after that did Python leave my side, except when I went into a building. He wouldn't come inside, but stopped just outside the door and lay down when we got home that night. I told him and Fred what I had done and that I wanted to keep Python no matter what. I said that I would sleep outside in a special house with Python if I had to, so he could live with us, and Fred smiled. You don't have to worry, Rocky. I'll build him a house and he'll stay outside just fine. Emma doesn't mind, do you, Emma? And of course she didn't. Just as they didn't mind anything I did that was half crazy, except that this time it wasn't half crazy. Python turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me next to Emma and Fred. The next morning, Fred went to work and called the sheriff from work. When he came home that night, he told me, Python is your dog now. I've cleared him with the law. You must take him for his shots and have Doc Emerson check him over, and I will make a doghouse for him Sunday. And that's how Python came into my life, and he was never left it since. When I go in the house, winter or summer, it doesn't matter. He stops at the door. He never once tried to get in. No matter how long or short I am in the house, when I come out, he is by the door and stands up. I grab the hair on the shoulder, and he walks with me. When I go to school or the movies or the library, it's the same. He stops at the door, and he waits, and everybody knows him and that he is my friend. Nobody touches him or me when he's with me. Except once. There was a boy that lived here named Kyle Offens. Kyle was one of those people who tease other people who aren't right, and he took to teasing me because he thought my leg was funny. I didn't pay any attention because of what Kyle was like. He had a brain about the size of my little fingernail and only knew 3 words, or maybe 4. But one afternoon when I was walking past him on the way home from school, he started teasing me and took a poke at my arm. It wasn't much of a poke, and I didn't even notice it, just a touch. But in about half a second, he was on his back. Python had him down and was standing on his chest and had all of his teeth showing. He was growling deep in his chest so that it sounded like a car engine inside a garbage can, and Kyle was telling me he was sorry for anything he'd ever done to me and just about anybody else in his life. After that, nobody had touched me or Python again, and after a year and another year, it was ever just me. It was me and Python. When I went outside, he was there next to me, my hand on his back, leaning a little. When I stopped, he would stop. And when I looked at something or somebody, he would look at the same thing. In a while, I didn't think about it. Came to accept that he would always be there. When people talked about me, it wasn't just, there goes Rocky, or here comes Rocky. It was, there goes Rocky and Python. We were like one person, Rocky and Python.